I'm joined in the studio by Zia Yusuf, Head of Policy at Reform UK. Good afternoon to you. Thank you for coming in so quickly.
My pleasure.
To us. One of the things that's exercised you before we get into more of the detail is the announcement as a kind of fait accompli of how digital ID will be used. Your reaction is, well, so we're having it, are we?
Well, it's £1.8 billion is what's in the numbers in the OBR report. £1.8 billion for digital ID, for which there is no electoral mandate. There's nothing in the manifesto. Nobody wants it. It's incredibly unpopular in the country. They are getting that £1.8 billion from the Home Office budget, which they've already frozen in real terms, and they're adding no new budget to it, which means they are literally, this government is taking money away from border control, i.e. the Home Office budget, in order to spend money on digital ID, which supposedly was meant to help with border control. You couldn't make it up. And obviously we've had the leakiest budget in history, which has culminated in an enormous leak, quite fittingly. It's an omni-shambles budget from an omni-shambles Chancellor.
Would you expect a resignation from the OBR about this?
I mean, that's the least of what we'd expect. We need Rachel Reeves' resignation.
Why?
Forget about the OBR. She promised she would raise taxes by around £8 billion before Labour won the general election. They have already raised taxes more than 8 times that amount, right? Almost £70 billion in increased taxes. What's it paying for? An increase in welfare spending. According to the OBR new number, welfare spending is going to grow by £16 billion.
Are you not in favour of taking children out of poverty?
We are in favour of, for example, removing welfare for foreign nationals. I mean, we already laid this out. We are in favour of, for example, stopping payments to people with non-serious anxiety conditions and putting them back into work, which all of the evidence from across Europe tells you that is the best thing.
She's taken an awful lot of foreign people out of state pension receipt, hasn't she?
Well, let's look at the overall numbers. What's happening is debt is going to continue increasing. She is raising taxes on people. The doom loop, we just talked about this. There is one big doom loop this country has been in because of the Tories and now Labour, and within that there's lots of sub-doom loops. The only way you're going to stop this is to reverse all of that, which means you've got to reduce public spending and allow people to keep more of their wages. Lucy's text that you just read out, I couldn't agree more with her. And here's the worst part of this. None of this was in Labour's manifesto. They lied to the British public in order to get themselves elected. Now they are betraying the British public.
She mentioned the NHS a lot, on the waiting list being brought down not by 1 million but by 5 million since they've been in power, and she gave all praise to Wes Streeting for that. Reforms plans for the NHS aren't entirely clear, are they? You have clearly started a conversation about a very different funding model for the NHS. How would reform have brought down those waiting lists by 5 million?
So we have no plans to change the funding model for the NHS. The most important thing we can do for the NHS is stop the insatiable growth in demand on its services. Here's the eye-watering detail. Since 2010, the British population has grown by 10%. Over 95% of that is through immigration. Real spending on the NHS has since doubled. So real spending doubling to cope with a 10% increase in demand. What's that
word immigration covers a lot.
What's that telling you?
That covers lots of types of immigration, including very good, productive working immigration.
That is the minority. The minority of those people have come in on work visas. That's the reality of it. So we need to reduce the demand on the NHS. And the only way we will do that is with a serious border control policy and deporting people who are here illegally.
So your focus after that speech, which was so heavy on on economics because it's a budget, is to focus almost largely on border control issues.
So you asked me about the NHS and the most powerful thing we could do to resolve the strain on the NHS. We laid out, remember, just last week, we laid out £25 billion in savings.
No, the biggest strain.
£25 billion in savings.
I need to throw a fact in here for you. The biggest strain on the NHS is the growing elderly population in this country and the fact that we live a lot longer, wherever you're from. That's the biggest strain on the NHS. Let me bring in...
I disagree with that statement.
You might disagree. Talk to the King's Fund if you disagree.
The real spending on the NHS has doubled and the population has only grown by 10%.
We'll talk to the King's Fund about that because that is a fact. Zia Yusuf, Head of Policy at Reform UK, stick with us. Stephen Flynn, SNP Leader in Westminster, joins me as well. Before we lose Zia, I know you have to go at 10 past. Anything you want to say in response to what you've heard from him so far?
The only thing I didn't hear from him was an explanation about Nathan Gill and the guy, I think it was, who took took money from the Russians, I believe it was. I didn't hear him talking about that when it came in, but maybe that's because his leader's embroiled in a racism.
It's funny, someone from the SNP turning up here to talk about corruption. That takes quite a lot of gall. We've already covered that. We've already covered this. I've never met Nathan Gill. The first time I read his name was in the newspaper with regard to this case. It's ancient history.
He was not. It's not ancient history.
For you to try to besmirch the millions of people in this country who support reform and support Nigel shows that you've got no idea.
No, mate,
and that is why we have gained on you so much in Scotland.
You can't
and your
pretend this hasn't
incompetent reign in
happened.
Scotland is going to shortly come to an end.
You cannot pretend this hasn't happened. A man who was a leader of the Reform Party in Wales is now in jail.
Questions. I've already
for working.
Sorry, he was not leader of the Reform Party.
For working for.
He was not leader of the Reform
Party.
Party.
What was his Reform Party?
He was the head of Wales for about 43 days when Reform was polling at about 1% many years ago.
So he was the head of the Reform Party in Wales.
All right,
you said head of the Reform Party. It's not the same thing. You know that. You said head of the Reform Party, and that's not the same thing.
Let me bring this back, if I may, to the content of the budget, which, just before you go, Zia Yusuf, still in a related topic. The Chancellor did allude to increasing sanctions on Russia, and she said sarcastically, in humour, but sarcastically, I'm not referring, or I don't refer to the honourable member for Clacton. I mean, she was making a joke about the leader of your party being a Russian asset.
Rachel Reeves has made a habit of cracking jokes while destroying people's lives in this country.
Is he a Russian asset?
She's already driven a farmer. She's already driven a farmer to suicide because of the increase.
Is he a
you
Russian
obviously know
asset?
the answer to that question, and I take exception. I'm sorry. I take exception to you asking me that question. Are you seriously asking me the question if Nigel Farage is a Russian asset?
Yeah,
that is your serious question as a host of an LBC show.
Yeah, I have
let me categorically say that not only is that not true, it is deeply offensive, again, to the millions of British people who support reform and support Nigel Farage. And I'm sorry, But you can't,
let me say,
the notion
you cannot dodge questions about Nigel Farage by suggesting that I'm asking the question about people who are interested in voting for him. They have every right to be.
Whether you are serious about asking that question, because I put it to you, that is not remotely serious.
Nathan Gill was one.
Should we talk about corruption inside your party?
Nathan Gill.
Should we talk about what happened with your former leader and her husband and all of the outrageous?
One at a time, so listeners can hear what you're saying.
I will be very careful. Shall we? You have some gall coming in here talking about corruption, and I'm sorry, there are millions of people in this country who support reform. You have made that. You've asked that question with that intonation, with absolutely no basis for doing it, and I don't think that's remotely fair.
All right. Well, thank you. I've been told you have to go. You've had a limited amount of time with us, but thank you very much for joining us, Zia Yusuf, Head of Policy at Reform UK. A few more minutes with Stephen Flynn, SNP Leader in Westminster and MP for Aberdeen South. To be fair to the question that Zia Yusuf just asked you before we get into the nuts and bolts of the budget, are you satisfied that any corruption in the SNP is under control and is being properly investigated and has been properly investigated?
I'm not aware of what Zia Yusuf was referring to there. If he's referring to a private citizen who used to work for the party, I obviously can't comment on that because that's an ongoing matter. It's a very different thing to a politician within the Reform Party landing themselves in jail for 10 years for taking money from Vladimir Putin. I think that's quite an important issue, and if I was Zia Yusuf, I'd be trying to deflect from that as well.
Your own party was given special mention as well during the budget when the Barnett formula was announced. Satisfied? She wanted to know whether you were satisfied with it.
Well, actually, I find it quite funny because she said that Anas Sarwar had told her to give Scotland some money. It was just a pity that Anas Sarwar didn't tell her to make sure that growth was improving, that living standards were going to go up, and the energy bills were actually going to come down by the promised £300. I mean, if Anas Sarwar wants to have conversations with Rachel Reeves, he should probably prioritise those ones.
In a sense, the announcement on the child benefit cap, the lifting of the child benefit cap, mirrors what's been going on for quite some time in Scotland already, doesn't it? What was your overall sense of the welfare offer there in that budget today? Yeah,
look, the Labour Party, some of us can remember being in the House of Commons, I think it was just last year when the Labour Party voted to retain the two-child cap. So they've, of course, U-turned on that position. I don't think anyone credible in Scotland is going to argue that that's not a good thing, because it's going to lift children out of poverty, and I think we would all welcome that. My bigger concern is the fact that, as I kind of alluded to there, we have a Chancellor who stood up and given a chaotic budget. It was chaos in advance for the last few weeks. It was chaos in the hour or so running up to it when we all were reading what the OBR had to say, and then it was chaos during it. And I say that I say that because of the fact that we now know that the growth has been downgraded, that living standards are going to rise by lower than expected. And of course, we know that energy bills, and we've been told to be grateful about a £150 reduction in energy bills. The Labour Party promised us a £300 reduction in energy bills. And of course, they've gone up by nearly £200. They're expected to go up again by £50
on energy bills, given that the North Sea is so important here. What would your prescription for that be?
Well, if I may, on the North Sea, I think today's a very dark day for the North Sea. Producers, those in the supply chain, charities, academics, trade unions have all been lobbying the government for months now in relation to the energy profits levy, which they've chosen to retain. It's costing around 1,000 jobs a month within the industry itself. The consequences of that for energy security, for our economy, for the ability to actually deliver on our renewables transition is grave, and the Chancellor chose not to address that today. And I'm deeply concerned about the consequences that's going to have upon my constituents, people I represent, but more importantly upon the economy right across the UK.
And more broadly on the economy and on businesses, what have your constituents and in the wider Scotland been saying about what they want from Westminster on this?
Yeah, look, the decisions that the Chancellor took last year in relation to national insurance were catastrophic for many businesses and indeed charities. They just simply couldn't afford them. It's one of the reasons why growth has been so anemic, and I would suggest why growth has been downgraded in the years to come. But primarily it's been centred around the fact that the government have put in place this tax regime with regards to one of Scotland's biggest industries, a tax on Scotland's energy sector, as many would justify.
Because she was lauding her record there, early record obviously, on investment. You say she's had a blind eye to Scotland on that, do you?
I think she's completely ignorant to the damage that her government's policies, both in respect of taxation but also licensing, has had on Scotland's energy sector. And the flip side of that is that the government would argue that they want to see a renewables transition. I want to see that too. But when we look at some of the detail in relation to the auction round, which has just been put in place, that doesn't do what the government would hope it would do either. So we're getting hit from both sides. It's the worst of all worlds. And the consequence is that people are losing their jobs, 1,000 people a month, because of the decisions that this Labour government are taking. Now, I hate to draw a comparison, but Grangemouth they promised that they would keep the refinery open prior to the election. It's shut. They completely ignored any warnings from ExxonMobil in relation to Mossmorran, which is about to shut in Scotland as well. And in the North Sea, they're pushing the oil and gas sector off a cliff. This is the slow de-industrialisation of Scotland on the Labour Party's watch. They promised us that wouldn't happen. It is happening because of the tax that they're putting on Scotland's energy sector.
Brief word on the mansion tax. It's going to be one of the sort of headline issues from this budget, I think, even though it doesn't affect that many people.
Yeah, I'm not going to lose any sleep about it.
You're not going to lose any sleep on that. No. Particularly her response to the goad, the sort of jeering on the £5 million level was pretty definitive, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think you had a lot of Tories and Nigel Farage and Richard Tice rapidly emailing their accountants saying how do we dodge this? I'm being flippant, of course.
They might have been.
They might have been, yeah. They were concerned about that because it impacts them, because they're the wealthy ones in society. I think for most of the population, they'll turn a blind eye at that.